Okay, here we go. We're going to do chapter 3 and probably chapter 4. Chapter 3 is a short one. Pardon me, need to wet my whistle. I have to turn the heat down, dude, just a second. Sorry about that. This is the second take on this. The heat kicked on and the furnace is so loud that it destroyed the audio of the first one. So, got the new GoPro fired up and going, and going to be reading this off the computer screen. And so here we go. Chapter 3 of Inside Out by yours truly, and the title of the chapter is Sputnik and Friend. It was probably 1959, possibly October, but it was definitely a Wednesday, because that was the day of the week when we had family night with my grandparents, aunt, uncle, and cousins on my dad's side. Us kids had gone for a walk around the park, which is roughly 4 tree-covered acres, bounded by the house's shared driveway and the township gravel road, thus making a loop. One could and possibly should think of it as a hoop. Either way, you could walk from the gray house, past the middle house, to the stone house, and then down the hill to the gravel road and back to the gray house without stepping on grass. The layout is still the same today. Anyway, it was dark that evening, but it wasn't really late. There was almost no traffic on the township road at night in those days, and if anyone came along, you would hear their tires on the gravel long before you saw them. Also, little kids got to do all kinds of things they aren't allowed to do anymore. We were walking south on the gravel road towards the gray house with a clear view of the eastern sky when we all noticed a red light coming from the east above the village of Payson a mile away. Today, one would say it looked like a red satellite moving across the sky. I seem to recall that Sputnik traveled from west to east when my mom and I watched it go over in October of 1957. I could be wrong about the direction it took, but what my cousins and I saw on the gravel road that night was different. Sputnik couldn't stop or hover, could it? No, it never could, not once. That is what this satellite did. But Sputnik was the first satellite to orbit Earth, the first satellite of human manufacture. Anything else should have been a propeller-driven airplane. First, the light caught our attention. Then, as we pointed at it, and when it was almost directly overhead, it stopped. Then it began to increase in size until it had doubled and then tripled. Several of us exclaimed, "It's coming down." Fear set in. Yelling and pointing followed. Almost at that moment, as if it wasn't in the business of scaring little kids, it made, as I recall, a sharp curve at the bottom, and zoop, it went straight up. It went away as an outward bound, quickly getting ever smaller until it was totally gone in just a second or two. The little curve at the bottom sold me on it changing from down to up and then going into outer space. I ran to the gray house and made an excited report to the assembled adults of the stupendous sighting made by everyone in the younger generation. I quickly met the ridicule and laughter that throughout history so many others have reported. I was now one of them. That was the night when stuff got real. That response to my truthful report of what had just happened also chipped away at feeling like there was an us that included me along with everybody else. Being so casually dismissed didn't change what I saw. That part of me could be genetic. In any event, the feeling of rejection went to the bone and stayed there. At this point in my life, I don't really care who anyone may think they are. All are welcome to know what they saw, you included, to the same extent that I am, but not more so. My grandmother on my dad's side was called Buzzy by her grandchildren. She was Henry Seymour's daughter. She took my sister, Beth, on a trip to Europe and the Middle East in about 1960. They visited Haifa, Israel, and the Shrine of the Bab that overlooks the Mediterranean Sea from the side of Mount Carmel. The visit had no effect on them, and they felt no need to mention this place to me any more than any other point of interest until about 11 years later, when an old synchronicity with my family began to manifest itself beyond denial. The movie Exodus came out that same year, and I got to see it. I liked it. I still like it. It was shot on location, and so it is a time capsule for historians like me. The Israelis were portrayed sympathetically, and so I liked them too. Foreshadowing is important in movies and in this book. I'm going to pause the book for a second. Exodus was shot in and around Haifa and Akka. And so it's an especially cool movie for me because I've been to all those places when we lived over there. And so looking at them in the movie, you see where that countryside is. It's just amazing. If you're ever going to Israel, take a look at that old movie Exodus before you go or after you get back. It's really, I don't know, it's a really cool movie to see all of that stuff before modern times really set in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, I guess. Okay, back to the book. Chris Christopherson once wrote some song lyrics that said, "He's a walking contradiction, partly truth and partly fiction." My name is Grant, after all, and I was becoming enamored with military history. Robert E. Lee and Stonewall Jackson were becoming heroes of mine. The promoters of the romance, whatever that meant, of the lost cause were working overtime. The character of my namesake, General U.S. Grant, had not yet been rehabilitated. Though his practicality was his genius, and it was on full display if you ever looked for it, I never recognized it until later in life. He was too often described as a drunkard and a butcher. I chalked up his victories to overwhelming numbers and equipment, while the South was portrayed as the underdog. Americans like me often pull for the underdog, etc. The misdirection fostered by those arguments have been fully explained and exposed by better authors elsewhere if you are interested. My point here, for purposes of character arc, is that I was a rebel because of both truth and fiction. Without enough perspective, read that as distance. It can be hard to tell the difference, especially as a child. I identified with the underdog, didn't care much for authority, bought into the rugged individualist shtick, and though I read about slavery, it was not real to me. I, who had never met a person of color in my life at that point. Pause here. I'm growing up in Western Illinois, okay, farm country. Just so anybody tuning in knows where we're talking about. Back to the book. More real were the antique guns and swords that hung on the pegboard of my bedroom wall. I was a 10-year-old with his own museum. The American Civil War centennial was unfolding as a celebration of American history. I was given a library's worth of popular histories. I was given the Marx Civil War toy play set for Christmas. Nothing says America like war toys for Christmas. I got that one a couple more times. And I was given the other war play sets as they came out. The guns I just mentioned, they were mostly cap and ball conversion muskets, including an 1817 Harper's Ferry musket. The place name I associated with John Brown's famous raid. The date made the musket the oldest in my collection. I associated it with a time when things were still made largely by hand. The year was also notable for another reason that I wouldn't discover until later. It might seem that I was a candidate for military school, but no, I was too much of a rebel. Kids were sent to military school to learn discipline in those days. I already had that. I did what my parents wanted, and for doing that, I could get rewarded. That is how it was. But always, somewhere in the back of my mind, the rebel brooded. As time went by, I got better at both rebelling and brooding. I didn't buy into every idea that was being finessed by the survivors of the Depression and World War II, the humbly self-proclaimed greatest generation. I was just a country boy who played guns a lot. My friends and I thought it was fun. The Civil War was just another Western with bigger shootouts. I tell you this to show how, in one sense, it seems extremely unlikely that I should find the writings and declare my belief in them and the messenger who brought them. But if you know the writings, you already see that I was a perfect candidate for what they do. They help you change yourself once you know you want to. I was never big on other people trying to change me, and the writings confirmed that only I can change me. Only you can change you. With UFOs, on the other hand, seeing them and admitting to yourself that you did also changes you. Telling someone else about it, regardless of their response, may change them just a little. You may have no choice in the encounter, but the telling of it is totally up to you. Also, I should add that about this time I began having a couple of dreams that have recurred from time to time over the years. In one dream, I remember how to fly. It is so easy. You just run and step up onto something like a box, a table, or a tree root, whatever, and with the next step you leap upwards and you are airborne. You can then flap your arms like wings and soar about, glide, sail, whatever. I love those dreams. I hope you have them too. There's a quote here, quote, "O son of love, thou art but one step away from the glorious heights above and from the celestial tree of love." The passage is talking about life after death, and it goes on to say, quote, "Take one pace and with the next ascend unto the glorious meads above," unquote. I don't know if the flying dreams have something to do with death or not, but I associated that wording from those quotations with these dreams after finding the writings years later. In another dream, I explore a cave that lies just under the surface of a hillside. A spring flows out at the bottom of the hill, and the cave connects the bottom of the slope with the top. The hillside is on a farm, my farm. It is a real location. The imagery shares much with the journey of the soul into the afterlife as recorded by the Egyptians and the ancient Americans. I didn't know anything much about that archetype when the dream started. And that's the end of chapter 3. Chapter 4, Valley McCann and the Sword of Opportunity. If you're just tuning in, I think we talk about this opportunity as a poem that we talk about in chapter 1 or 2. It begins like this. Everybody around my hometown knew Valley McCann in those days. He was a peddler and an American original. He would stop by our house every Sunday morning before church and show us what he had found that week that we ought to be interested in purchasing for a negotiated price. He went door to door, buying and selling in his old Studebaker. It may not have been that, but it was old, and I am pretty sure the company that produced it was no longer in business by the 60s. One day, he brought a sword he had picked up from a lady around Palmyra, Missouri. If the Confederacy had needed an unofficial capital in Missouri in the 1860s, Palmyra might have applied for the job. My dad had a dictionary of swords, and the one Valley brought that day turned out to be a College Hill Arsenal officer's sword, CSA. They counterfeited a lot of Confederate swords later on, but that one was clearly the real deal. It became my most prized antique. It had been through the war and was the worse for wear. I took it to school to show my history class, which was all the same kids as in every other class, but the sword stayed in my locker until the proper bell. How was that done? Well, you see, you just carried it in, went to the locker and got it upon request, showed it, passed it around the room so all the kids could hold it, and took it home at the end of the day, maybe on the school bus. I don't think that is done much anymore. This item plays a short but not unimportant role in the synchronicity of this story, as it carries one of the strands that were weaving themselves together the whole time. At the risk of messing up the chronological timeline, let me say that when the Baha'i faith was constructing the seat of the Universal House of Justice on Mount Carmel, a stone's throw away from the shrine of the Bab, they asked the believers to contribute to the cost. They have to do that because unless you are a Baha'i, your money is no good. The faith cannot accept it. That is forbidden in the writings. That prevents lobbyists or anyone from getting financial leverage. Donations should come from the heart, not from a desire to purchase influence. Anyway, I was short of cash, as we all are sometimes, but I wanted to help, so I sold my prized Confederate officer's sword. It brought a good price for the times, but that didn't matter, and does not matter. What mattered, you see, is that I gave up something, What matters, you see, is that I gave up something that I considered valuable in favor of something that I considered priceless. This gave a new and more positive purpose to the item, I suppose, but also this may be one way to increase the frequency and vibration of our own energy. Something must do it. And I guess I have always had a flair for the dramatic. So when I sent the sword off to its new owner, I included a handwritten letter that said more or less, quote, "Be it known that this is one of the swords that, through this transaction, has been beaten into a plowshare at the time of the end," unquote. You probably do not and cannot believe that, most likely. Your perspective, anyone's perspective, unless you believe what the writings have to say, will not permit it. So, more than likely, the new owner tossed my letter in the trash. I wrote that note for posterity because I believe that is true. Even if the letter was thrown away, I remember doing it. So it turns up again here for more people to see it. Odd, isn't it? It is also a huge hint as to the revealer of the writing. It is also a huge hint as to who the revealer of the writings claims to be. But that goes beyond the scope of what we are up to here. Suffice it to say, I wanted to document that a weapon of war that served the cause of slavery and the division of good old e pluribus unum could be transmuted into the means to help build a house for the spiritual authority that would foster the equality of the races all around the world. A nice juxtaposition of things, I think, don't you? It is a sword like this that poet Edward Sill is describing, after all. And not only that, the officer who carried the sword, who was ready to die for a cause I totally disagree with, and Valley McCann, who found it and sold it to my dad, are all part of the story now, because there would be no sword anecdote and no sacrifice for the benefit of human unity without them, right? And what good would any of it be if you didn't read it? Make of it whatever use you choose, but the writings say this, quote, "If it is considered with insight, it will be seen that all the forces of the universe, in the last analysis, serve the covenant. In the future, it shall be made evident and manifest." This was the future for that Civil War sword. As I held it for the first time with a sense of historical awe in my dad's den in the gray house that Sunday morning, other possible futures still awaited all of us, as they do every morning. And that's the end of chapter 4. I think we'll stop this episode here. Thanks for watching. I'll try to get another one up soon. Bye for now.